Denver Nuggets have fired head coach Michael Malone and won't extend general manager Calvin Booth, the team has announced. Hired in 2015, Malone is the winningest coach in team history, while Booth was elevated to GM in 2020. The duo led the Nuggets to their only NBA title in 2020-22-23 season. Assistant coach David Adelman will take over for Malone for the rest of the season. NBA reporter Brian Windhorst is with us now. Brian, we were all shocked when we heard the news. What was your reaction when you found out what was going on in Denver?
Yeah, it's definitely shocking. I think we should look at this in three different silos. The first one is Michael Malone. It is extremely shocking that you would move on from a coach this late in the season, no matter the circumstances, especially when he is the winningest coach in the history of the team, led you to a championship 2 years ago. Even if there was difficulties within the locker room or difficulties with the front office, that he would not be allowed to have the playoffs to try to deal with it is very, very surprising. My discussions with people in the process so far, I have not identified anything that they saw this coming either. So this seems like an ownership decision. The second thing is you look at the decision to move on from Calvin Booth. This, again, the timing of this was shocking. This was less surprising to the league, however, because Calvin Booth's contract is up after this season. They had negotiations throughout the course of the year, and they broke down. They were not going well. It was known within the league that there was a possibility that the Nuggets would move on from Calvin Booth, despite him helping construct a championship team. But we also didn't know how the postseason would play out, and it have been possible that if his recent draft picks, which were really at the heart of frustrations between Michael Malone and Calvin Booth, Booth wanted him to play his draft picks. This is a tale as old as time in the NBA. And if those young draft picks had played well in the playoffs, it's possible Booth would have been retained. But the Booth thing was not a surprise to the league. There were people thinking that job was going to be open for several months now. And then the third silo, which I think is probably going to be the most relevant, lasting one, and that is Nikola Jokic. You are now derailing and messing with the backbone of this superstar player's prime of his career. This is a guy who won a championship 2 years ago, and this team was put in a position where they could compete for multiple championships in a row. They have been affected by injuries. They've been affected by ownership electing not to re-sign veteran players and relying on new draft picks. And they've been, affected, obviously, now by these decisions late in the season. But you are dealing with a guy who is completely dedicated to your franchise, who has put himself in position to trust his prime years with your team, and now you have taken away the only coach he has ever known. And so they now are under some pressure, obviously, to try to, put together something for this season. But they now have got to replace the whole brain trust and not alienate Jokic. And he is probably the most committed superstar we've seen of this era to his organization, other than maybe Steph Curry. But you have really put yourself on the line, if you're the Kroenke family, Stan and his son Josh, who's the governor, to not mess this up after making these decisions now.
Yeah, the Jokic part, I think, is a very important piece, especially because they still have a regular season to finish and a playoff push, I would imagine. Do you essentially think that what they're doing now, these decisions that they've made, means that they're punting on the entire rest of the season? Absolutely not.
You would never punt with Jokic. To me, the biggest thing that they've got to handle, Jamal Murray's been out the last 5 games with a hamstring injury, and if Jamal Murray's not healthy, their chances at the postseason are severely impacted. That, I would have argued, was the most important thing for this team. By taking away a coach who has dozens and dozens of playoff games with Jokic and this team, dozens and dozens of playoff victories, many, many series victories, and taking him away from the sideline, that is not heightening your chance to win. Obviously, there have been times in recent days and weeks where Malone has had harsh words. He's criticized his players. That's who Michael Malone is. He's been that way for a decade, 20 years. I've known him for 20 years. He's always had a short temper and had called rage timeouts and fumed at his players on the sideline and fumed at his players in the locker room. That type of attitude got them a ring. Got them a ring. I can certainly understand why at a certain time that may run out, and no coach is ever, stays on a job forever. And maybe you've reached that point, and maybe that would be a decision you would even reach at the end of this season. But to do it with just a couple of days left in the season, when you need all of your resources to kind of line together to try to salvage where you are in this season, is a very, very surprising turn of events. And like I said, maybe there was a precipitating incident, and we will learn in the next hours or days of what happened. But in me talking to sources there today, this seemed like it caught a lot of people out of the blue.
Okay, so you mentioned Joker, the fact that this was his only head coach. That's why that's very important, that relationship. But you also mentioned the fact that Michael Malone seemed to be a hothead on the bench. Did you have any sense that other players on the team didn't like Malone as the head coach of this organization?
I am sure over the course of the time, and remember, this core has been together for years now, that the relationships with Malone come in and out. But this is who he is. This is a guy who's been in this job for 10 years. He, for 10 years, has been the exact same guy. He was this guy 20 years ago when I met him, when he was considered one of the best young assistant coaches in the league. He would lose his temper, and him losing his temper was part of it. And I'm sure that runs, thin at times, but they've also had incredible success, and he has, over the course of time, goaded this team into raising their level, especially defensively. He's constantly on them about their defense, and he's raised this team that is built mostly out of offensive players into playing a type of defense that can win at the highest level. And so, look, they blew Game 7 at home in the second half last year against the Timberwolves. Had they not done that, they might have won 2 titles in a row, because the only team the Boston Celtics could not beat last year was the Denver Nuggets. And so that team is still in there. That team could have still aligned. And for them to pull the plug on this and really impact that is a surprising decision and a risky decision, even if you decided you were going to move on from Booth and Malone at the end of the season.
It is certainly very risky, but you mentioned that you don't punt on a season when you have Joker on the roster. So what do you think the rest of the regular season and then going into the playoffs looks like for the Nuggets?
Well, they're in a fake position right now. When you look at the standings, it looks like they're in the 4th seed, but that's not really fairly how to look at it. It's because they're a win behind the other teams, or a win ahead of the other teams. They're tied in the loss column in a 5-way tie, and they're really not in good shape in the tiebreaker there. Their real seed right now is 7. They've lost 4 games in a row. Jamal Murray has been out with his hamstring injury. They don't know when he's going to come back. They have to go on the road for 2 of these final 3 games, and all 3 of these games are relevant. The Kings are fighting for positioning. The Grizzlies are fighting for positioning. That game with the Grizzlies could end up determining on Friday who makes the play-in and who gets to skip the play-in. And then I don't know about the Rockets. The Rockets are the 2 seed right now. By Sunday, they may not have much to play for, but these games with the Nuggets are vitally important. They're essentially must-win games to try to avoid the play-in and get seeding. And now they're going to do it with someone. David Alleman's got a great reputation. He's interviewed for jobs like he was going to be a head coach in this league, but now you're giving the team to a guy who you're asking for huge production from a guy who's never done it before at this level.
All right, we'll see what happens in Denver. Again, Brian Windhorst with the latest out of Denver. Thank you.
In the NBA on SportsCenter, the Nuggets have fired Coach Michael Malone and General Manager Calvin Booth. Reporter Ramona Shelburne joins us now from her car because, again, this is breaking news and a little bit fluid. Ramona, what kind of reaction has this news already gotten from around the league?
I mean, I'm afraid my phone is going to blow up as we're talking on the phone right now, because it really is like a shocking move. This guy won a championship 2 years